The first Quincy invasion is one of, if not the absolute best sequence in all of Bleach, and I don't say that lightly. But if you find any Bleach fan that's at least read the 1000-Year Blood War arc, I think you'll be hard-pressed to find someone that disagrees with that opinion. The 1000-Year Blood War arc's first major conflict left such an impression on fans that it's still talked about today as one of the pinnacles of writing, pacing, suspense, action, and overall storytelling in all of Bleach. And that goes for me as well. To this day, it remains one of my favourite sequences of chapters in the entire series. But what is it about the first Quincy invasion that makes it such a success? What is it about this series of chapters that's not very long that left such a strong impression with fans? In this video, I want to take a deeper look at the first Quincy invasion, something I have been dying to talk about on this channel, as it truly is one of my favourite, just one of the absolute peaks of Bleach storytelling for me, that really so little else in the series gets anywhere close to capturing that same feeling that we were having week in, week out when these chapters were releasing. So we're going to take a look at what makes this such an effective opener to this arc, what I believe are the three main reasons why it succeeds so thoroughly, and the impact it had on the rest of the final arc as well, and how the rest of the final arc was left trying to play catch up to what was such an incredibly powerful opener. Before we get started on the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do so now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, as well, as it does help to support me and the channel, as it hopefully means we'll get more traction on the YouTube algorithm. And finally, if you really enjoy what I do here and you want to take that support from me another step further, I do also have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. Everyone who's doing that right now is coming up on screen, and as always, I want to give a huge shout out to each and every one of you. I couldn't do this without you, so thank you all so very much. So before we get started on what I believe are the three main principles that make the first Quincy invasion so effective, what is the first Quincy invasion? In the context of the story, what does this really mean? In my professional opinion, the first Quincy invasion spans the range of chapters from chapter 490 to 515. As you can see, not a lot of time, about 2.5 volumes tops, a truncated portion of the story to really cram an awful lot in. The 1000-Year Blood War arc has only been going about 10 chapters up until this point, but already things are very different from how we know them to be. Pacing seems to be through the roof in comparison to the relatively glacial Arrancar arc. Things are moving considerably faster here than really they ever have before. The villains are already introduced about 3 chapters into the arc, and they've declared war on the Soul Society by murdering Chojuro Sasakibe. Really, technically speaking, that is the first Quincy invasion. When a few Sternritter arrive, they take out Chojuro, others declare war on the Soul Society to Yamamoto himself in his own private quarters. But really what is colloquially known as the first Quincy invasion is when the entire Vandenreich force assaults the Seirete itself from chapter 490, which ends with that Vandenreich boot thematically stomping on the Soul Society as though to quash the Shinigami like the ants they are. Like I said, it's a very small portion of chapters, a very small period within the story itself, which lends even more to the idea that it is so very impactful, that despite it not being that long, you know, it's a mere fraction of the fake Karakura Town battle. And yet, in my opinion, Kubo does so much more with the first Quincy invasion. He crams more in, he nails the pacing, and makes for just one of the most unbelievable segments we ever got in Bleach. So when the Vandenreich launched their massive attack on the Soul Society, a full-scale surprise attack on the Soul Society, It is a force to be reckoned with, and that leads me to my first main reason why I think it is so effective. It is like nothing we have ever seen before. Take the previous arcs as examples. Obviously, you've got the Lost Agent arc. No one even comes close to the Soul Society in that arc, which is fair enough. Then you have the Urankar arc, which despite being a huge war between the Soul Society and Aizen and his Urankar, again, the Soul Society remains essentially unscathed, untouched, an unassailable fortress that even Aizen himself doesn't manage to step foot again on the sanctimonious ground that is the Seirete. And then, of course, you have the Soul Society arc, which is really the closest thing we have to the Thousand Year Blood War, and Kubo would make that parallel numerous times throughout the final arc. But of course, in the Soul Society arc, it's all about Ichigo and his merry band of misfits assaulting the Soul Society, becoming Ryoka, and taking on the captains. But they do so with noble goals in mind, and they do so without ever really wanting to kill anyone. Ichigo even revives Ikkaku after defeating him in battle. So while Ichigo and his friends are making their way through the passages of Seirete, they are fighting on Seirete ground, it is nothing like what we get in the first Quincy invasion. Out of nowhere, explosions rupture the Seirete, enormous blue columns of fire burst out of the ground, and Soul Society is assaulted by at least 16 captain or higher level opponents, just like that. They appear out of nowhere. It's almost like a horror movie in how unprepared the Shinigami actually are. Despite being put on high alert by the Captain Commander, they still had no idea this was about to happen. There's a wonderful moment that really kicks off the first invasion where several low-ranking Shinigami suddenly realise Yhwach is just in the air above them. He's just there, looking down upon them all, again, like the ants they are. But they naively think that he is outside the Shakon Maku, that their defensive barrier that exists around the Soul Society will keep them safe. However, in a horrible turn of realisation, they suddenly understand that Yhwach is already inside the Shakon Maku, and the attack is launched. There's a wonderful image of these pillars of flame appearing behind Kajamaru, and he's just terrified. As you would be, because you are completely caught unawares. Not only that, but you have no idea what this enemy is capable of, except for the fact that they have already broken into Yamamoto's office, and they have already killed a vice captain. So this is really just like nothing we have ever seen before. These white-cloaked invaders are waltzing down the cobblestones of Soul Society, walking through the hallowed alleyways of Seirete itself, massacring Shinigami just as they go, without a care in the world. They are taking Shinigami out left, right, and centre. They don't care about anything to do with Soul Society outside of their singular order to kill everyone. And that's what makes this so terrifying, so dire, is that these guys are an organised, uniform military force that can rival that of the Gotei 13. Again, not really something we've ever seen before. The Urankar were very powerful, and of course the Espada were immensely powerful as well, but they were a mostly disjointed band of animals who were only brought together by Aizen's pure strength. That was the only thing holding them together, otherwise they were an immensely fractured unit who could barely listen to orders. What you have here in the final arc is almost the total opposite of that, and although dissent would appear in their ranks a little bit later, the Vandenreich as a whole is presented as this extremely zealous army that everybody comes together to worship their god emperor, and they exist for one goal and one goal only: to purge the Soul Society. And so that is truly terrifying, and that's why this first invasion stays with us, because it is so unlike anything we have ever seen. To see Espada-level bad guys walking the streets of Seirete is crazy. You know, seeing things like Robert Akutrone sniping a Raite Time member just out of the sky before he can get a message to Kyoraku. That sort of thing is so awesome. To see Sternritter like Pepe and potentially Giselle controlling the R&D department, making them fight and kill each other, it's terrifying. And you'll never forget those double-page spreads that herald in, that usher in the first invasion. The massive spread of the blue pillars of flame appearing all over Seirete, even on hallowed sacred ground like the Sokyoku Hill. It doesn't matter. They are coming up from the shadows itself to take down the Soul Society. Doesn't matter where you are, there is nowhere to hide. And that brings me to principle number 2 as to why I think the first Quincy invasion is such a success, a resounding success. And that's the idea that Kubo lets the bad guys win. Now, I love the villains in Bleach. I am historically a huge fan of villains in general, more so than the heroes, although I love most characters in Bleach anyway. And I think Bleach's Rogues Gallery is fantastic. You know, the Espada are awesome, Aizen's probably the best character in the series. But if there's one area the villains of Bleach are not so hot at, it is being successful. They are not the most successful characters in the world, but that all changes now. In the final arc of Bleach, the 1,000-Year Blood War, Kubo makes good on the name Blood War, as he probably had to, really, by making the Quincy Vandenreich extremely efficient, effective, and successful. And this extends to beyond the first invasion, but it's really here you feel the impact of the boot of the Quincy more than ever before. Now, like I said, this does carry on throughout the rest of the arc as well. There's a point right at the end of the arc where they're trying to get to Varvelt, where Shinji says something like, "How many times are the enemy going to get one up on us?" And that's a sentiment that Kubo's really trying to get across. No matter how many small victories the Shinigami might steal away every now and then, the Vandenreich's always another step ahead, which absolutely couldn't be said about the Espada. Now, Aizen was always a couple of steps ahead, but that was always just Aizen. But with the Vandenreich, it trickles down from Yhwach himself, and really all of the Sternritter in many different ways feel like they are ahead of their Shinigami counterparts. And with the first Quincy invasion, the expectations we had were ultimately flipped many times in the favour of the Quincy, and so that is another reason it's so effective. Izuru Kira, immediately as soon as the battle initiates, rushes to try and take someone on, and he is instantly, effectively killed. Although he comes back way later on in the arc, he is, for all intents and purposes, one shot and taken out of the fight. And, you know, the closest you ever get to something of that caliber in the Urankar arc is Aion taking out Matsumoto, and even she is okay enough to be back on her feet before that same fight is over. Here, Izuru is gone, and you better believe he is gone. Like, he would be dead were it not for Mayuri, and even Mayuri doesn't get him back in the action for another almost 200 chapters. And this snowballs, it just carries on. The Shinigami think they have a plan, they don't. The Quincy steal their Bankai to use for themselves. It's a triumphant moment for the Vandenreich. Now, while Kubo letting the villains win is a big part of why the first invasion is so successful, another part is that Kubo knows when to give the Shinigami a small, well-earned victory as well. Now, it's a small period of chapters, like I mentioned earlier, 490 to 515. But even just within that small amount of chapters, and this all comes back to the idea of Kubo letting the bad guys win, but it all comes down to the quality of writing in these chapters is nearly unparalleled in Bleach. Kubo works best in these small, isolated stories. Turn Back the Pendulum, Everything But the Rain, and I would argue things like the first Quincy invasion, which is so obviously thought out from start to finish. How much Kubo had planned beyond 515 is anyone's guess, but certainly the Quincy invasion here is meticulously well planned out, and you can see it in the back and forth between both sides. This actually feels like a war. It's not unrealistic. The Gotei 13 no matter how caught unawares they are, they're an immensely ancient and powerful fighting force. They will not go down without a fight. So for it to be a total steamroll would be unrealistic. It's incredibly dire for the Gotei, more dire than anything we ever see, but it's realistic in that they actually continue to put up a fight. And it's that sense of despair juxtaposed with hope and resurgence, only to be smacked back down again by despair, that makes this such a roller coaster. And I was lucky enough to be reading this every week, and every week Kubo was hitting us with something else, and it was so unbelievable to witness. But for example, if you look at it from the lens of it being an actual fight, you go from good moments to bad moments. It's a terrible moment when the Shinigami have their Bankai stolen from them. We cut across the Seirete to Hisagi getting the living snot beaten out of him by Driscoll Bursey, but then who arrives? Yamamoto. And in a resounding moment of victory, Yamamoto incinerates Driscoll in a single hit. Another moment a little bit like this, after Byakuya is brutally eviscerated by Asnot, again a moment that totally subverted our expectations in the best possible way. Kubo knows that he has dealt a massive blow, not only to the Gotei, but to us as readers. So he makes it right, slightly, by having almost the next page show Kenpachi Zaraki carrying 3 corpses of Sternritter on his back. It's meant to be a moment for us as readers to cheer again after, like, reading with our head in our hands as Byakuya is turned to paste on the wall by his own Bankai. One of my favourite moments in this entire mini-arc is when Renji screams at Az, stop! And he tries to use Bankai, but the moment he does, a hand grabs Sabimaru, tears it in half, Master Masculine drop kicks Renji halfway across the Seirete. It's an unbelievable scene of loss for 2 characters who nearly always make it through absolutely fine. Just that small choreography, that small moment where Mask jumps in, boots Renji, you see him go flying across the Seirete, it is so brutal to watch. And Kubo knows it, so he juxtaposes it with a scene of Kenpachi arriving triumphant on the field, carrying 3 Sternritter, dumping them at the feet of Hashval and being like, "Are you the boss of these scrubs to you, Hubbark?" It's a good moment for the heroes. And it carries on like this. Yamamoto's defeat of Driscoll sparks a fire of resurgence in the Shinigami themselves. Yamamoto blasts through the Seirete and you feel it reverberate throughout everyone. They all sense that the fight is still on. They all sense they have a chance still. And you get a lovely moment that shows Hitsugaya, Matsumoto, Komamura rallying the troops, the Sternritter being like, oh boy, maybe we weren't quite expecting this. Bambietta being like, I thought you guys were dead and gone. And then Shunsui leaping, slicing Robert Akutrone across the chest. This would be less effective if the villains just won the entire thing. The Shinigami have to score victories for it to feel like a real battle. And they do. And it makes it even worse when they eventually lose. When the bad guys eventually win. That wonderful... Robert Akutrone is such a weird character because he's completely forgotten after this, but during the first invasion, he's a major villain here. And he has a great moment with Kyoraku where he says, like, oh, it's really nice that you guys have got your morale back. That's really good, because clearly he was thinking this is way too easy. But Robert says, but don't be fooled. Your boss will lose to our boss. And the reason for that is because you guys aren't the only ones whose morale is lifted when your boss fights. And I loved that, because it was a way of humanising the Sternritter, of making you realise, because we as readers see these guys as the alien invaders who have just come crashing into Soul Society, they're butchering everyone, but what Robert says here reminds us that they are effectively human, they are all fighting for something as well. And it goes back to this idea of a just war that Kajimaru was talking about before that kind of went out the window a little bit later on in the story, but... all of this is to say, it hurts even more when the Vandenreich do eventually win. And the fact that Kubo allows that to happen is crazy. Yamamoto's death is heart-wrenching. It's also important to note as well that the first invasion isn't just limited to the events taking place in Seirete. Concurrently, there is an incredible fight for survival happening in Waco Mundo as Ichigo and his friends and the native Arrancar try and fight off the Vandenrijk's hunting army with its incredibly domineering and cruel captain Kirge Opie, which eventually evolves into another of these back and forth scenarios where suddenly the good guys are able to get a one-up on this guy when it's discovered that he can't steal Ichigo's Bankai. And that whole segment in Waco Mundo is equally thrilling, and it's happening at exactly the same time, and Kubo really meshes these two fights together really, really well, as Ichigo is connected via Akon, who himself is another brilliant example of the stress and tension that the Soul Society is currently undergoing. Kubo doing a fantastic job of spotlighting relatively unknown characters and throwing them into the mix, throwing them into the fray. The first Quincy invasion is responsible for basically any of the fandom that Akon now has, but it's so good seeing him thrust into such an insane situation where you really see him thinking on the fly, and it works incredibly well. But bridging those two fights between the one in the Seirete and the one in Waco Mundo, with Ichigo attempting to make it to Seirete, is just such a wonderful way of driving that suspense. And of course, all of this back and forth, the captains managing to just snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, the Sternritter coming back tougher than ever before, it all eventually leads to an ultimately cataclysmic kappa to this first invasion, which is the stunning showcase of Yamamoto's Bankai Zanka no Tachi, which is just incredible, immense payoff for us as readers. It again feels like a victory lap for the Shinigami. Yamamoto starts that fight by barbecuing 3 Sternritter at once, and it seems like this is the ultimate crescendo to a Shinigami victory. But of course, despite the unbelievable, impressive display of Yamamoto's Bankai, he is tricked and defeated. But really, perhaps the biggest curse of the first Quincy invasion is the way it seemingly sets up the rest of the arc to fail. Now, obviously that is hyperbolic, and I do love the rest of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but is any of it as good as this portion of chapters from 490 to 515? Probably not. It really sets up an amazing fight, an amazing conflict between the Shinigami and the Quincy that is just so well paced. Everything is happening. Everything that happens in this small battle is so impactful, right down to the captains having their Bankai stolen, right down to the small flashes of Yamamoto's past as he fights in Chojiro's honor. All of that sort of thing is just so good. And it also set up the Vandenrijk as well to be this truly scary, terrifying enemy, and they don't quite live up to that again. But like I said earlier, Kubo does do a decent job with these guys of keeping it consistent that they remain ahead of the Soul Society at most junctures, which I think was important for him to do. But it's just interesting seeing how the rest of the arc then kind of had to live in the shadow of what was considered by many to be one of the best pieces of storytelling Bleach had ever seen. And I think that brings me nicely to my third reason why it's so effective, and that is Kubo commits. Now, maybe he doesn't commit in every way we'd have liked him to. Whether you believe or not that Byakuya should have died, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that Kubo committed to the earth-shattering depiction of Byakuya's near-death defeat. Kubo committed to having Kenpachi Zaraki have the living hell beaten out of him. And Kubo committed to having Yamamoto actually be murdered. And it's all of this that informs where the rest of the arc goes. That's how important the first invasion was. Yamamoto's death leaves a massive hole in the Seirete, both literal and figurative. It's as though the heart of the Seirete has been gouged out after this fight. We see a changed Gote, mostly in the captains, but the Gote itself is limping like we've never seen before. And the first Quincy invasion ends in a resounding victory for our villains and leaves in its wake a changed Gote 13, which is the main commitment Kubo needed to make for it to really stick. And you feel the effects of those changes right the way through to the end of the arc. You know, we get a new captain commander. The Gotei is united in a way we've never really seen before. Certain characters even get invited to the royal palace. So for a period of time in the story that's so very short, the first invasion accomplishes so much. It is truly amazing, and I cannot wait to see it in the anime. When you look at everything that happens, it's so cool seeing the Sternritter assaulting each different division's barracks. If you take a moment to think about it, you can sort of see who goes where. For instance, BG9 attacks the 2nd Division, the 3rd Division comes under attack by Basby and Nananajaku, the 4th Division is mostly kept out of it, the 5th Division we don't see, the 6th Division is attacked by Asnot and Master Masculine, the 7th Division is attacked by Bambietta, the 8th Division by Robert Akutrone, the 9th Division by Driscoll Bursey, the 10th Division by Kangdu, the 11th Division presumably is attacked by Jerome, Berenice and Lloyd, but it's difficult to tell if maybe Kenpachi is just moving around a lot. The 12th Division is attacked again presumably by Pepe and maybe Giselle, and the 13th Division again is a difficult one because it seems like it's attacked by Yuhabak and Hashvolf, because they are the ones who attack Hidetomo Kajamaru, who is a member of the 13th Division. But then Rukia seems to come under attack by somebody else. But it's just so cool seeing the Sternritter filter out through the Seirete, seeing this massive battle take place. And there's that almost final kick in the teeth after Yamamoto's body is obliterated by Yuhabak. The Sternritter then summon in the Soldat to assault the Seirete completely. And you just see it crumble. You see it fall, you see it be obliterated. And I think the ideal place to end this video is to take it right back to the very beginning. Before the final arc came out, Kubo teased us by saying, an event will happen at the start of this arc that will make the good guys, the Shinigami, cry out in anguish and despair. And the first Quincy invasion is that moment. That is what it is, completely realised. And so in my opinion, those are the reasons it is so effective, why it is one of, if not the best sequence in all of Bleach. It's like nothing we've ever seen before in the series. Kubo lets the villains win, even though there is an amazing back and forth, the likes of which we just don't get in the Fate Karakura Town. You know, if you just take a moment to compare this first invasion, which is a mere maybe 25 chapters compared to the over 100 chapters of the Fate Karakura Town, that back and forth just does not exist. It feels inorganic. And don't get me wrong, I love the Fate Karakura Town. But one of the biggest issues that plagues the Espada plagues them here as well, which is they don't ever win. And so what you get is a series of battles where the good guys basically win every single fight, meaning Aizen is the one who then has to pick up the pieces right at the end and take out an absurd number of enemies just to get it back down to manageable levels. Whereas here you just don't get that. You get natural, organic victories on both sides until eventually it comes to a head, with Ichigo's phenomenally good arrival. And I mean, I've spoken about this before, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's a masterpiece. It's amazingly well done. And I even remember not fully appreciating it when it came out the first time, because 511 was one of the most insane chapters I have ever read in my entire life, and 512 I remember thinking was a bit low-key in comparison. I was like, is this it? Because most of the chapter is just Ichigo arriving. But when you take it as a whole, when you see how cinematic it is, how effective it is to see Ichigo in such a way, in such a position, with Byakuya of all people, to see the character development coalescing and coming together and just working so well, and everything is capped off. The reason I say it all ends with 515 is because it ends with the rain finally lifting off, as Kyoraku brings the new Gotei into a new age. That is where it ends. It's almost as though the first invasion existed to wipe out the old within the Gotei 13, to knock them down a peg and to make them realise that change was necessary. And so it's so good seeing all of those captains coming together in a way that they are just so angry and bitter with each other. They've never suffered a loss like this before. They're shouting at each other. Again, another immensely effective scene as they stand around the shattered remains of Ryujin Jaka. And suddenly Kyoraku comes in to clear the air and he says, you know, look forward, move forward. We exist to protect the Soul Society. That's why we are the Gotei 13. As the rain finally begins to disappear. But that's it for this video, guys, on the first Quincy invasion. I really hope you liked it. This is a part of the story I'm immensely passionate about. I just think it's so fantastically well done. And I go back to it again and again as a reason why the Thousand Year Blood War arc is so good. Because of moments like that are just so well crafted, that build suspense, that build anguish and despair and triumph, all in the space of just a couple of volumes. But let me know, guys, in the comments below what you think of the first Quincy invasion. Did you enjoy it as much as I did? Did you like it as much as I think most people tend to? What's your favourite moment from the first Quincy invasion? And which moment are you most looking forward to seeing in the anime itself? Guys, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done already, and until next time, I'll catch you later. And I'll see you then.